Okay, so this video is about labor market, and first we have to start with discussing labor market structure. Okay, so you start with population, which means all the residents in a given economy. Then you distinguish between dependent population and independent population. So according to terminology adopted in the United States, independent population stands for all the civil, adult, non-institutionalized people, which means in the age between 16 and 64. So from independent population, we have to exclude retired people, those who are older than 64, children, those who are younger than 16, those who are in prison or any similar institution, and those who are in army. So all of those people go to the dependent population, and independent population is composed of those who are able to work. So again, they are not children, they are not retired, they are not in army, they are not institutionalized. So out of those who are able to work, we have to distinguish between those who are willing to work and those who are economically inactive. So economically inactive people are people who are able to work technically, but for some reason are not willing to do so. So economically inactive population includes housewives, students, and as I said, the rest of people who are able to work but do not willing to do so. So they are unemployed, but they are unemployed voluntarily, so they are not included here to unemployment. And finally, labor force consists of employed and unemployed. I believe it's pretty straightforward when it comes to employed. So those are people who have a job, and unemployed are those who do not have a job but are actively seeking for a job. So this is the difference between unemployed and economically inactive. So both of them do not have a job, but those are actively seeking for a job and those are not interested. So you calculate unemployment rate as the ratio of number of people unemployed to the number of people in labor force. Employment rate as the ratio of people employed to the number of people in independent population. So please pay attention. Employment and unemployment rate never sum up to 1. And labor force participation rate is calculated as the ratio of labor force to the size of independent population. Okay, so this is the first task for you. The size of the adult civil non-institutionalized population, practically of the age between 16 and 64, so practically independent population, is 200 billion. Labor force participation rate is equal to 80%, and there are 20 billion of people unemployed. You have to calculate employment and unemployment rate using these formulas. Okay, so if you'd like to practice, please put this video on hold and I will proceed with the solution. So first, we start with calculating the size of the labor force. For this, you have to multiply size of independent population by labor force participation rate, and you will get 160 billion. We know that there are 20 billion of people unemployed. That's why in order to calculate number of people employed, you have to subtract number of people unemployed from the size of labor force, and you will get 140 billion. Finally, you calculate unemployment rate at the ratio of unemployment to the size of the labor force here. And you calculate employment rate at the ratio of number of people employed to the size of independent population, and here is the answer. Okay, so when it comes to the types of unemployment, there are 4 basic types which are structural, frictional, seasonal, and cyclical or cyclical unemployment. So let's start with structural unemployment. So structural unemployment arises from two reasons. First, it can be labor market rigidities or stickiness, speaking less formally. So basically, it arises from all the factors, probably legislative factors, which limit the degree of labor market flexibility. So for instance, if government introduces minimum wages or unemployment benefits are too generous, then firms are willing to employ less people because the cost associated with employment increases, and as a result there is structural unemployment. Additional reason behind structural unemployment is a mismatch between the skills and knowledge of labor force and skills and knowledge required on the labor market. So for instance, if there are a lot of low-skilled workers, but firms would like to employ high-skilled workers, then we deal with structural unemployment. So those low-skilled workers will remain unemployed because they do not have enough skills and knowledge to be employed. So structural unemployment is the major and the most dangerous type of unemployment, and usually when we discuss fighting unemployment, it's about structural unemployment. So basically in this case, there are two policies government can implement in order to fight structural unemployment. First, government can eliminate labor market rigidities, like get rid of minimum wages, remove unemployment benefits. And second, government can provide education and training for workers in order to ensure that, skills of the labor force and skills required on the labor market are indeed matched. So frictional unemployment arises from the fact that sometimes people change their occupation. So when they do so, it usually takes some time to find a new job. So technically for some period of time they are unemployed, frictionally unemployed. So frictional unemployment is not that dangerous. It's even sometimes a good indicator. So it shows that there is some mobility on the labor market, that workers have a chance to adjust. If they are not satisfied with their job, they can find a job appropriate for their skills and knowledge. So technically frictional unemployment promotes allocative efficiency on the labor market. So it's not that bad. The only thing government can do in this case is to improve information on the labor market. I don't know, like organize something like job fairs or anything like this. Seasonal unemployment arises from the fact that during some seasons, some workers have nothing to do. Yeah, it's very informal, but I believe it describes the idea well. For instance, people from agricultural sector usually have little to do in winter and probably spring. So for some period they are seasonally unemployed. Again, there is nothing you can really do about seasonal unemployment, so it's a matter of fact. Also, the size of frictional and seasonal unemployment is really minor in comparison to structural unemployment. And finally, cyclical unemployment arises from the business cycle fluctuation. So for instance, when economy is in a recession, then firms dismiss workers in order to, decrease the costs of production because they produce less. When economy is in the phase of expansion, then firms hire more people, even though their skills might not be perfectly appropriate for a particular job. So all of this is included to cyclical unemployment. In recession, it's positive. In expansion, it's negative. And when economy is in equilibrium, there is no cyclical unemployment. So the sum of structural, frictional, and seasonal unemployment is called natural unemployment or full employment. Full employment does not mean that there is no single person unemployed. It simply means that there is no cyclical unemployment. So unemployment consists only of structural, frictional, and seasonal unemployment. So yeah, please keep in mind that natural unemployment is also called full employment. Okay, so I believe it's fine. Now let's proceed to some formal model. So here you can see a wage setting curve, which describes the relationship between wages required by workers and the number of people employed. So in this case, we assume perfectly inelastic labor supply. So here we have labor force, and we assume that the size of the labor force does not depend on wage. So it depends on some institutional factors, I don't know, social, cultural, whatever, but not on wage. So the difference between labor force and size of population is called voluntary unemployment. So those who are unemployed, voluntarily, and using classification we discussed before, it's here. So those people who are economically inactive are also called voluntarily unemployed. Okay, so there is a positive relationship between wage and the number of people in the labor force due to the bargaining power of the labor force. So the idea is like this: when there are a lot of people employed, there is small unemployment, and when there is small unemployment, bargaining power of the labor force increases. So very informally, if there is small unemployment, then your boss is aware of the fact that if you decide to quit this job, he will spend a lot of time trying to find a new worker. So in this case, he is more willing to increase your wage due to the fact that your bargaining power increases. So in this function, we have the relationship between real wages and output gap. So each time when there is positive output gap, like GDP is bigger than potential output, so unemployment is smaller than natural unemployment, this is basically the same, then bargaining power of labor force increases, and since we have plus here, wages will increase as well. So that's why we have a positive slope. So we also have to account for all the unemployment benefits and other opportunity costs of work. This is here. It's captured by the variable b. So basically, if there are high unemployment benefits, then you are not that motivated to find a job. You're fine. So basically, that's why there is a positive relationship between wages required by the workers and the size of unemployment benefits. And finally, Z stands for all the legislative factors which, again, might motivate you to stay unemployed, or the factors which increase your wage. For instance, minimum wage legislation, generous unemployment benefits legislation, generous unemployment benefits, or any similar governmental policy. So another side is price setting curve, and basically it describes the wages set by firms. So here we analyze wages required by the labor force, and here we analyze wages the firms are willing and able to pay. So in this case, we assume that firms have constant profit markup. So out of output, they take the constant proportion, which is their profit, and wage is defined as the difference between output per worker and firm's profit per worker. So yeah, basically output per worker depends on the productivity of labor force. So for instance, if there is increase in the stock of capital or improvement in terms of skills and knowledge of the labor force, then output will increase, and if we assume constant profit, then wages per worker will increase as well. So this is the idea. if people become more productive, so they can produce more, and firms require the same profit, then wages go up, which is in line with the neoclassical model we discussed before, I believe. So finally, in equilibrium wage is defined by the intercept of, wages paid by firm, wages per worker, and wages required by the labor force. And in equilibrium, unemployment is defined as the difference between labor supply, or the size of the labor force, and number of people employed in equilibrium. So again, this is very similar to what we discussed before. Okay. So, for instance, using this model, you can analyze effects of change in unemployment benefits. So, what will happen if government decides to introduce more generous unemployment benefits? So, in this case, if we have bigger unemployment benefits, wage setting curve will shift up, like from this to this. And in equilibrium, there will be smaller number of people employed, so unemployment will increase from this value to this value, and wages will remain the same, because wages basically depend on the productivity per worker. And here are some, stylized facts from OECD countries regarding unemployment rate statistics. So, as you can see, unemployment is higher in Greece, in Spain, in comparison to Japan and United States. So the idea is like this. In Greece and Spain, there used to be, at least before the crisis, very generous unemployment benefits and very high degree of labor market protectionism. So there were high unemployment benefits. Workers had to be informed in advance, that they are going to be dismissed. At least like 3 months, I think, but I'm not sure about this. And in Japan and United States, this is not a thing. In the United States, a worker can be dismissed within 1 day. So, using this graph, you can say that this area, between the value of the intercept of wage setting curve and wage axis is really smaller in Japan and the United States. So accordingly, they have smaller unemployment. So this is the idea, more or less. Although there are other factors, this was just to introduce some illustration for you. Okay, so this is the task for you. Assume that as the result of governmental training program, labor productivity increased. Analyze the effects of this change on wages and unemployment. So you have to use this graph. If you'd like to practice, please put this video on hold and I will proceed with the solution. Okay, so training is associated with increase in labor productivity. I believe it's pretty straightforward. So now skills of the labor force improve and output per worker increases. And as we discussed before, using price setting equation, increase in output, assuming that firms have constant markup, is always associated with increase in wage. So in this case, this curve will shift up, and in new equilibrium, we have higher wages and smaller unemployment. So basically here, unemployment will decrease due to the decrease in structural unemployment. So there is a relationship between unemployment and inflation. So if there is output gap, so GDP exceeds long-run potential GDP, then unemployment is smaller than natural rate of unemployment. If unemployment decreases, then bargaining power of workers increases. As a result, wages increase. If wages increase, and assuming that profit markup remains the same, prices go up, then inflation increases, expected inflation increases. So when workers negotiate on their wages, they require higher wages for the next period, then wages increase, and we start the cycle from 3 to 7. So the idea is that in short run there is a negative relationship between inflation and unemployment, which is here. So if unemployment is smaller, inflation goes up. If unemployment increases, then inflation goes down. So please keep in mind that this works only in the short run perspective. So in long run, it's not possible to manipulate unemployment by manipulating inflation and output gap. So short run Phillips curve describes the trade-off between inflation and unemployment, as I mentioned before, and in long run there is no such trade-off. So basically it reflects very simple and intuitive idea that in long run unemployment depends on some structural factors, like productivity of labor force, stock of human capital, technological advance, and so on. So for instance, if government invests in training, education, and so on, structural unemployment goes down, so natural unemployment decreases, and long-run Phillips curve would shift to the left. Because, as I said, in long run, unemployment is equal to the natural rate of unemployment. Like GDP is equal to potential output. So what you have here at the intercept of long-run Phillips curve and unemployment is natural rate of unemployment. Okay, so that was it, and thank you for watching.